One really hot topic that has gripped the US public is gun control. Now, as a Canadian who lives in Europe, I would like to give my view on this subject because I notice people have the wrong idea.
There is a student here with a gun. He has shot out a window. I believe one kid got, I've been Columbine High School. I don't know what's in my shoulder.
Republicans and Democrats have different views on how guns should be regulated among the American people. Now, despite all the hatred stirring up between the two sides, they both do respect the Second Amendment and the people's right to bear arms, but they have opposing views on how accessible they should be to the US public. Democrats believe that society needs stricter gun laws because they believe that if there are less guns, there will be less violence. However, that is the correct strategy only if you assume that all shooters obtain guns legally. Many subjects will resort to less complicated and illegal ways to obtain firearms, and the gun violence will continue. Republicans are very defensive about the current gun laws and believe in less regulation because they believe that if guns are heavily restricted, only criminals will own them, and there would be even more violence because people wouldn't be able to shoot the attackers on spot. But what they don't seem to see is that if you shoot someone, even in self-defense, you are still a party to gun violence. This debate has gone on for decades, and I had to say it has accomplished nothing. Here I will try to compare the US to the rest of the developed world. Former Democratic President Barack Obama said that other developed nations do not experience the same kinds of mass shootings that the US experiences. And he is right, but before liberals go on cheering, the main reason isn't what you think. Before I mention what it is, conservatives have always done their best to claim this as false.
We've even heard this from Barack Obama, who said that this type of mass violence does not happen in other advanced countries. This is simply not true. Mother Jones has compiled a list that I've linked below of all mass shootings since 1982 in America, which total 790 deaths and include the most recent mass shootings. This is about a 35-year span. There have been 974 deaths in America in mass shootings in the last 50 years. To put this in perspective, in France, where there are incredibly strict gun laws, 532 people were killed in mass shootings in 2015 alone, which of course was a year filled with Islamic attacks. France has a population of around 65 million. America's population is around 326 million. So a country where it is illegal to own guns that is less than a fifth of the population of America produced 67% of the entire number of fatalities and mass shootings over a 35-year span here in just a single year.
I don't know where you got that statistic from, Blondie, but I can tell you that you're wrong. Around 13,000 people die of gun violence on a yearly basis in the US. This dwarfs any developed nation. If you put together all deaths from homicides, suicides, and accidents, France has on average 1,700 deaths. Germany has 800, Canada has 700, Australia has 200, Ireland has 46, Poland has 93, Luxembourg has only 8. Iceland has only had one murder in all of 2017 when a 20-year-old woman was shot, and this incident shocked the entire nation. The list goes on, and it's worth noting that gun violence is decreasing in developed nations while it is actually increasing in the US. But back to my earlier point. I'll mention why gun violence isn't so prominent in other developed nations, and the short answer is mentality. Let me explain this in detail. Guns have become a part of American culture, and ever since the nation was still a colony, the people have had a strong attachment to their guns because it was how they defended themselves from many dangers that lurked around them, such as Native Americans, the Spanish, Mexicans, and so on. This desire to defend themselves still stands today. The Second Amendment in the Constitution states, it literally states, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Security of the free state. That is the key word. Americans are trigger-friendly because they always feel scared that someone will shoot them first.
I have family that lives in the States. I used to live in Canada and moved over there, and it's so different.
They get afraid more easily.
Oh, yeah. Yep, very much so. Because everybody reacts over there just like that. They don't stop and think. First reaction is pull the gun out. You're on my property. I don't know. It's just different over here.
Believe it or not, this is not the case in other developed nations. Let me use Canada as an example. Per capita, Canadians own more guns than Americans. However, for a different reason. Hunting is a tradition in Canadian culture, and most gun owners own something like this, a weapon that is used to kill deer. Furthermore, you cannot hide this under your clothes or anywhere else. So imagine walking around town with this in your hands. I mean, not exactly the best stealth weapon. As a matter of fact, less than 12% of households own a pistol or a handgun, which is a big difference from the southern neighbor. Canadians use guns for a different purpose, and this is the main reason why Canada has much less gun violence. Europe has a similar view on gun ownership. Switzerland has a very high rate of gun ownership when compared to other European countries, because the country has a conscription policy which requires all adults to spend time in the military. Despite the fact that Switzerland hasn't fought a war, it's always on a state of alert, while allowing its members to keep their firearms at home. I mean, a 2011 referendum to limit weaponry to military installations was even defeated. Many other European nations see gun owners using firearms for recreational and sports events while also occasionally using them from hunting. The weapon that most gun owners use are not handguns or automatic weapons like in the US, but are actually antique guns that have a piece of history in them. For example, in June 2016, Joe Cox, a British MP, was shot and murdered by Thomas Mayer with a sawed-off shotgun, something like this. Republicans and Democrats in the US have been looking at their issue all wrong when comparing themselves. Developed nations have less gun violence not because firearms are less accessible to the public, but because non-American Westerners do not feel the need to carry guns with them at all times. Americans do indeed love their guns, and I'm not saying that they have to be taken away. Instead, the US government should be asking the question on how to make Americans less trigger-friendly, and not burden themselves with the question on how accessible they should be. If conservatives really believe that the US is a unique nation, then they really need to prove it by appealing to their citizens for safer streets. And if liberals really want America to be more like the rest of the world, they need to behave like the rest of the world.